half past, so I think we should probably make a start. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Daniel. I'm the product manager for typing.com. And I'm sure many of you know us already. We are digital learning experts, we are keyboarding nerds, and our typing tutor is used by about 45 million students and teachers worldwide. I think that's about right. And we are delighted that ISTE has invited us to speak with you today about a topic that is very close to our hearts, namely the achievement gap that exists in education and what we can all do to help close it. I know that 2020 was a challenging year for many reasons, and we know that for a lot of the teachers here today, it will further expose what you already knew, that digital skills are true life skills. And focusing on those skills will not only help students in their schoolwork, but will better prepare them for an increasingly digital future. After today's session, I hope that you'll walk away feeling more confident and better prepared for whatever the next 12 months has in store. So, to give you a sense of today's order of play, we're going to start by sharing what we've seen and what teachers have shared with us about the challenges they've been facing in recent years, some of which are related to lockdown and others which are more entrenched. We've been up to our elbows in research related to the achievement gap, and so I want to share a few of the key learnings that we've identified, why we believe typing is so important to educational equity, and a few simple techniques that you can use to help close this achievement gap. Finally, we'll end today's session with a Q&A with our very own curriculum expert, Molly Sullivan. Molly, would you like to join us on the stage and say a few words about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Dan. I'm excited to be here. So I'm going to give you guys just a little info about myself before Dan kind of takes over for a bit and talks more about this achievement gap. Before joining the teaching.com team as our curriculum manager, I was a classroom teacher for about 10 years. I mostly taught kindergarten, but I also taught third grade for a little bit as well. And while teaching, I also completed my master's in ed tech. And I taught a little coding on the side. So to say I was busy would probably be an understatement. My final year teaching was remote, partially. So I experienced firsthand sort of the shift in tech needs that schools are seeing. So for the past 6 months, our typing.com team has been thinking about those needs and developing a curriculum that we think is really going to help close the achievement gap that Dan's going to talk about right now.
Thank you very much, Molly. As we go through today's session, you can add any questions that you have for Molly into the chat. We'll collate them all and then we'll discuss them at the end. Speaking of the chat, do keep an eye on it throughout the task. If you have any questions, you can just drop any questions and comments in there. We can maybe share some links with further information as well. And of course, if you have any feedback at all, we'd be delighted to hear from you. If you'd like to email us directly, our contact information is up here on the screen. I'm daniel.m@teaching.com and Molly is molly@teaching.com. I'm still really annoyed that there was another Daniel before me, so I don't get the good email address, but you have to take the knock sometimes. Also, for anyone who is new to ISTE and these sessions, you can find lots of information in the PDFs and links below this screen. You can add them to your virtual tote bag, and we'll actually be adding more content to that over the coming days. But let's start with 2020, shall we? Which for many of us was a real turning point in both our lives generally and our careers in particular. We've, of course, seen a trend towards the use of digital, web-based tools for learning in schools for many years now, right? They're not new. But broadly speaking, the adoption of these tools has been slow. It's been methodical and driven by a desire for educational innovation and administrative efficiency rather than pure necessity. With lockdowns being imposed on schools around the world, though, and remote or hybrid learning suddenly becoming the default, schools and teachers were placed in a really tough position. We had school administrators contacting us, telling us that they didn't know how to respond to the situation, with official guidance that seemed to be changing almost daily. Teachers told us that they were left feeling overwhelmed by what they were facing, trying to replicate a normal classroom experience for their students at a time when things were far from normal, desperately trying to learn any number of new tools and applications and getting them to all work nicely together, and at the same time trying to train their students to use those same tools. It's crazy. And overall, there was a real sense that the sector as a whole was unprepared for such a dramatic switch from classroom operations to remote teaching. And this was partly an infrastructure issue. We all know that schools are underfunded, so it's obvious that many schools and districts were not well positioned to handle such an operational shift. I've spoken to teachers trying to share 10 Chromebooks across 5 classes, trying to support students without a home internet connection, and jumping from free trial to free trial, desperately searching for tools that their students enjoy using that also meet administrative and safeguarding requirements. Better funded schools with more established IT capabilities have, of course, been better able to respond in such a crisis, but we know that those schools tend to be in wealthier areas and students are more likely to have home computers and strong internet connections. For schools in poorer areas or districts without those advantages, 2020 forced them into making really tough decisions about how to prioritize their spending both now and in the years to come. But alongside that question of infrastructure, we've also observed a cultural issue based on the assumption that as the years pass and computers and phones become ever more ubiquitous, our students' digital literacy will automatically keep up, as if by magic. The development of these skills, typing, using a mouse, basic operational procedures for making a computer do what you want, is still being seen by some purely as some optional extracurricular activity for their students, rather than as a basic form of literacy that has a direct correlation on those students' successes, both in school and then in later life. Debbie is a district librarian. She teaches an elective computers course to grades K through 8, and she reached out to me because she saw how much students in her district were struggling with their state tests and would continue to struggle unless she made some sort of intervention. Debbie told me that many of her younger students couldn't scroll up and down on a page. Even some of her older students, during a test, would read instructions to press the return key and then panic because they didn't know what that was. And when it came to typing their answers, the process was slow and full of errors. And this was infuriating for Debbie, because these are kids who know the material they're being tested on, but the basic literacy needed to operate the computer and input those answers has just been assumed of them. And we can see this too with Veronica. She's a middle school business technology teacher. She's worked in teaching for over 20 years, and she's seen this transition firsthand from a world where learning to use a laptop or a desktop computer was some kind of novel, exciting step in a student's education, to one where middle school students are assumed to already have the digital fluency needed to use computers to learn effectively. But when COVID hit and remote and hybrid teaching came in, those one-to-one sessions with students showed her that actually those assumptions were often dead wrong. For some students, it's a lack of confidence. For others, it's a lack of practice. But either way, Veronica was looking for some way to help those students who are not just at risk, but who are already far behind their more digitally literate peers. And then there's Gina. Now, Gina was one of the first teachers I spoke to when I joined typing.com, and she remains one of my favorites. She's been teaching keyboarding since the 1980s, and she herself had learned to type on a mechanical typewriter. Mention in chat if you've ever used one of those. For Gina, learning to type, building that base level of comfort with using a computer to learn is not just important for school, but is a true life skill, something that is going to help those students for the rest of their lives. And when we spoke, she told me that she had been looking for ways to ensure students in her class would have the same opportunity for fundamental digital literacy as students in wealthier neighborhoods, because she was convinced that this was the best way for them to avoid the achievement gap both now and in the future. All of these teachers are concerned about their students' digital literacy because they fear that without deliberate intervention and focus on these areas, their students will fall into the achievement gap and simply fall behind. And when you look at the research, it's easy to see why. In the last 18 months, there's been a palpable impact on the educational outcomes of almost all students. We can see the gap that has already emerged among college students when it comes to readiness benchmarks. We've witnessed declining scores for both the ACT and SATs. And if we look at the breakdown of both the quality of remote instruction and the average number of months learning lost during the pandemic, it's clear that Black, Hispanic, and low-income students are missing out the most. The achievement gap for historically disenfranchised groups has only increased during this pandemic. And we can see that for white students too, the achievement gap is still an issue. With months or even a year of learning lost, the need to focus on skills that can help close this gap is greater than ever. Or, as the journal Nature said just last month, there is an urgent need to coordinate global efforts of digital skills education and training, which can help students succeed in the digital age while curbing risks and inequality. This isn't just a US problem, by the way. School closures caused by COVID have affected over 84% of the world's student population. And even where countries have responded with digital skills education initiatives, there is little or no coordination or consistency, even among terms like digital literacy. The issue, in a nutshell, is that even though we agree that there's a problem, and we agree that it's a big problem, people disagree on what needs to be done about it. And students of history can afford themselves a wry chuckle at this point. And I can sort of understand why. As more of the world joins the internet, we need to be aware of the kinds of skills training that everybody needs in order to be full, active, safe participants in the digital world. If we break down exactly what that means, though, it's a daunting task. We're not just talking about the technical skills of operating a computer, but competencies and social norms that range from understanding and maintaining good password and security habits to applying emotional awareness to virtual settings, to learning how to manage risk online and developing a healthy sense of privacy and personal boundaries. When we were developing our new curriculum, we realized that we couldn't just focus on the pure mechanics of keyboarding without including at least some of these elements if we had serious ambitions to close the achievement gap. But where should we start? We decided that there were 4 areas that we were well positioned to build into our new curriculum. The first is digital identity, which approaches the question of what it means to be a good digital citizen. We want our students to be active, confident participants in digital spaces, and this means developing strong norms and values about how to behave online, how to recognize good and bad behavior, and how a student's online persona correlates to who they are in the real world. This is something that we know that many students, and far too many adults actually, really struggle with. So tackling this problem early is essential. Safety is, of course, a paramount concern to everyone here, and ensuring that our students learn how to stay safe online is a vital part of our new curriculum. Of course, this is partly about protecting oneself from strangers, but it's also about avoiding dangerous content online, managing the risk of cyberbullying, and learning good habits around passwords and sharing personal information. When we talk about the benefits of learning digital skills, we're often, rather euphemistically, talking about job skills and employability. And this is where a focus on communication comes in. Learning how to interact with other people online in a courteous, professional way. Why the way that we structure an email impacts to how people think of us. And how to build a resume that catches a manager's attention for the right reasons. And beyond employability, the simple reinforcement of proper punctuation and grammar in students' written communication remains an important part of what we're trying to achieve. Lastly, digital literacy itself, which for our purposes, we're taking to mean that our students can use digital technology to achieve their goals. Think back to Debbie and Veronica and the obstacles their students were facing. Ours is a typing program, so of course we are leaning on our expertise to ensure students develop good technique and can type quickly and accurately. This is fundamental to easy, confident self-expression, whether that's writing an essay or an email or lines of code. Mastering the keyboard, as Gina says, is instrumental to educational success and is a skill that pays dividends throughout our students' lives. And beyond the keyboard, it's easy to forget that mice and trackpads also form part of digital literacy. We aren't born knowing how to use these tools. They need to be learned, and so we've added lessons specifically to develop those skills. And why are we doing all this? Well, we know that, as Education Week reported last December, failing grades among students who are learning remotely is a real concern. And a big part of this is down to the simple question of how well a student is able to use the tools at their disposal. Without those digital skills, both mechanical and sociological, struggling in these circumstances is almost inevitable. But this isn't just about remote learning and dealing with lockdown. This is about providing the skills for students to thrive, both educationally and in their later lives. The achievement gap is a real issue, and I've spoken about the need for digital skills education as a way to help address it. But let's get down to brass tacks here. Budgets are stretched, teaching time is in short supply. So, what is the most impactful thing we can teach right now that's going to make the biggest difference and move the needle on our students' digital literacy, their communication skills, and standardized test scores? Well, let's look at the research. When schools include regular lessons on typing and associated digital skills, they see a 23% increase in test scores. When schools make the transition from paper-based tests to computer-based tests, as many are, they see an 18% drop in scores unless those students have been formally taught typing and built experience in using computer for learning. And students experience a 37% increase in academic performance when they've developed confidence in using the internet. For students from low income backgrounds, those most at risk from this achievement gap, this impact is even higher. All these results, by the way, come from the National Center for Education Statistics. But despite this, we see remarkably little time dedicated to typing. So why is this? Well, earlier I spoke about the challenges of infrastructure and culture. Then I was talking about the switch to remote or hybrid learning, but it remains true when it comes to teaching students to type. On the structural side, it's hard to find the time in a busy school schedule to dedicate to a skill like typing. And it might not be immediately clear where it fits into your curriculum. Teachers often don't receive formal training in teaching these skills, and ultimately a school finds it hard to prioritize typing over other things. I understand that. Likewise, though, we often see cultural obstacles to typing as a core skill. I spoke to a principal only a few weeks ago who was convinced that the hunt and peck approach to typing was good enough, until I shared some of the statistics we've discussed today. Similarly, teaching younger kids to type can seem a bit daunting, and so it can be tempting to put off typing and other digital literacy skills until they need them. But as we've seen, not only have students often developed bad habits by that point that take a lot of effort to unlearn, it's actually much easier to master a skill like typing when you're young, like learning a musical instrument or a new language. There's also a fear, particularly from older students and adult learners in my experience, that learning to type the proper way will slow them down. You often see this with students who perhaps do spend time on the internet or playing computer games, that they've developed their own style for typing and are reluctant to slow down, as they see it, in order to learn to type correctly with proper technique. Now, of course, this is actually an argument for introducing typing before these habits are built, right? But in these situations, I love being able to point at typing games like Nitro Type and the kinds of scores those players achieve through using proper technique. That can be quite a compelling argument. And these are all legitimate questions that schools face when the issue of digital skills and the need to prioritize them are discussed, whether it's at events like this one, or at PTA meetings, or over coffee during recess. But if the last 18 months have shown us anything, it's that taking the decision not to prioritize these skills means facing some uncomfortable truths about what that means for the achievement gap and our students' place in it. What we can do, though, to make these decisions less difficult is take a skill like typing and make it as easy to teach as possible. Obviously, that's partly on us to make a typing tutor that is effective and easy to use for both teachers and for students, but there are also some simple exercises that you can use to improve your students' typing, and perhaps even your own. Based on our research, we know that typing for at least 15 minutes per day is the best way to improve both typing speed and accuracy, and is far more effective than, say, typing for an hour only once per week. It's a bit like going to the gym in that respect. We've added a feature where teachers can set daily typing goals for their students, and we've already seen a massive performance improvement in students who use this feature. Beyond this, though, we also have some general principles for learning to type and some hints and tips for the ways that typing.com can help, which I'm going to share with you now. The first thing is to minimize errors. Learning to type accurately and with proper technique should be your first priority. Speed will come naturally with time. As well as building strong technique, in typing.com you can reinforce this by setting grade boundaries based on students' accuracy rather than their words per minute, so you're rewarding the right thing. Learning to touch type is amazingly valuable, and it's very impressive too to see someone doing it. So it's vital to practice typing without looking at your fingers. Now, anyone who's taught typing will know that this is easier said than done, right? And stopping your students from looking at their fingers while typing can feel like an impossible task. I've spoken to teachers who use old shoe boxes to cover their keyboards, which I personally think is a fantastic idea. But if you don't have enough old shoe boxes, however, typing.com encourages students to look at the screen rather than the keyboard by adding an on-screen keyboard and hands that model correct finger positioning. I've spoken a lot today about the challenges involved in computer-based state testing, but you can also use online typing tests to benchmark your students' performance and highlight any weaknesses. Typing.com has a range of free typing tests you can use with your students, which not only benchmark their speed and accuracy, but also highlight which specific keys they're struggling with and provides personalized practice lessons to fix those problem keys. Lastly, you know that saying that practice makes perfect? It's wrong. It's completely wrong. Practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. Whether you're practicing scales on the violin or shooting free throws or learning to type, you develop your skills by being deliberate with your technique and mindful of what you're doing. This is why our typing content is designed to be engaging for students, with a range of different exercises and activities to prevent them from just zoning out or going through the motions. When students work through our curriculum, we typically see a 92% increase in typing proficiency. And we usually put this down to a couple of factors. The first is adaptive learning. I mentioned earlier that our online tests can tell students which keys they're struggling with and provide targeted practice lessons to focus on those problem areas. What I didn't mention, though, is that even regular lessons can do the same thing. As students work through our curriculum, the system is constantly checking what keys students are struggling with and generates updated personalized practice lessons at regular intervals so that students always have the opportunity to work on their weaknesses. The next couple of areas are around student choice or being student-led. And this is something we've really expanded in our new curriculum as well, providing students with pathways in their learning so they feel in control and a sense of ownership over their learning experiences. This means if students want to practice their typing through typing stories with branching outcomes, or typing code, or by playing games even, students have those choices. And of course, teachers can restrict those options or require students to work through the materials in a particular order. But by default, students are encouraged to explore and learn through curiosity. In the new curriculum, this has grown even further, and I'll share some examples with you shortly. And the fourth factor is the insight we give both students and teachers over the progress that they're making. Teachers have told me how much they value not just the reports that they can generate for their classes, but that they can even see when a student has last logged in and what work they did. During lockdown, this feature has proved to be amazingly helpful. On at least 4 occasions, teachers have told me that students often wouldn't join their Zoom calls or Google Meets, but when they checked in typing.com, they could see that the student had actually logged in as normal and completed their assignments and sometimes gone on to complete extra practice. I mentioned our new curriculum, which we've been working on for the last 6 months, and with it, we really believe that we can help close this achievement gap. It focuses on building strong typing proficiency across all age groups and uses real-world examples to contextualize the digital skills we've discussed today, including online safety, good password practices, and writing content for a target audience. We've added even more cross-curricular content to support students in other subjects, and we help them with their exams. And finally, because the curriculums are structured by grade, students can build confidence by learning at a level that is suitable for them. Now, I promised some examples, so let's take a sneak peek at what our students can expect from August. So the first thing to say is you may be familiar with this screen for those of you who've used typing.com before, but this is the student portal. But what you'll notice is that we actually have a range of different grades that you can choose from. Normally, or the existing content is beginner, intermediate, advanced. But what we've done is we've developed content and lessons which are suitable for all different age grades. And I mentioned earlier about adult learners returning to learn to type, and this is a small but significant minority of our users. If I just give you an example here, you can see that they will learn the keys the same as any other user, but some of the options that they have are specific to them. For example, they have lessons on career preparation. They have other activities around job applications, which are particularly targeted at adult learners and high school students as well. So these are just some of the examples of the kind of applied typing that is very specific to adult learners. If I return to kindergarten for a moment, you may also remember that one of the things I said was that we're trying to think a bit beyond just keyboarding skills and thinking about some of the other important tools that students need to learn, particularly at a young age. And learning how to click and drag, like so, I love that sound, is something that we have included as part of our new curriculum. So not only can you just click and drag the letter T, you can see here, you can build a keyboard just like this. And we have many more lessons like this, but I won't spoil them for now. Something else I mentioned was about digital citizenship and trying to encourage good digital behaviors, good online behaviors, and reinforcing good norms and values. So here's an example of part of an activity from grade 8. What you've been doing here is you've been typing through multiple screens, learning about these different activities that you're working on. And in this example, you are working on a class project with some fellow students. And part of this class project means that you're messaging people, other group members online. And you're faced with this scenario. What should you remember when chatting with others online? Should you share all of your opinions, even if they upset other people? Maybe. Or should you follow the golden rule, treat others the way you want to be treated? And you can select whichever of these options you like, and then you have to live with the consequences and you learn from that. Maybe put your response in chat, like which option would you choose here? Would you share all of your opinions or follow the golden rule? One of the other things I mentioned earlier was about the importance of formatting content for a target audience, and that includes writing formal emails. And here you can see we are encouraging students to learn how to write emails in the appropriate manner. And one example here is you are having the opportunity to email Amelia Earhart and learn all about her career as a pilot. And not only that, if you start sending emails to these famous figures, they can actually start responding. So here we've sent an email to Mr. Leonardo da Vinci. You may have heard of him. And not only has he responded, you actually get to then choose, how do you want to continue this conversation? Do you want to ask about his early life and career, or ask about his painting career? And again, you can go through these lessons as many times as you like, taking the different options, learning all about these famous figures, whilst also reinforcing good typing practices. And the last thing I wanted to share with you here today from the new curriculum is part of the new resume building exercise. Just as an example, in this particular instance, you are applying for a job as a bacon tester. And there's a whole range of fun careers that you can be applying for. I have thought about changing my career to one of these as well. I won't tell you which, but I'm sure when you come to use the new curriculum, you can have a guess for yourself. That's quite enough from me for the time being. Let's bring Molly back on stage and take a look at your questions. And while we sort through the questions, Molly, let me just ask you this. We've been talking about the achievement gap. You were a teacher for 10 years. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the past year and a half definitely, brought to light an already existing achievement gap. I know that personally in my kindergarten class, we got started with remote learning, and I realized that many kids aren't tech ready with the skills that we assume that they had. And I know you talked about that a bit before, Dan, but even simple skills like clicking and dragging, or clicking on a multiple choice question, these things need to be explicitly taught. And we just assume that kids can already do it. So I definitely think that because our new curriculum is grade-based, and because these skills are scaffolded, they're starting out with things that are simpler, like clicking and dragging, before moving on to these more complicated skills. We're going to help to close this achievement gap.
Fantastic. I'm just looking through the chat here. We don't have any other questions at the moment, but we have had some questions in beforehand. If you have any questions, do feel free to pop some in the chat. But let me just look in the mailbag from before. I guess one good question that we've had quite often is, typing can often feel a little bit dry as a topic. I mean, it's hard for me to say that. I think typing is the most fascinating thing in the world, obviously. But as someone who has been in this situation, Molly, like, how do you keep students engaged when you're teaching them how to type?
Well, I mean, if anybody in here has taught lower elementary, you probably know that those K through 2 students just think that typing and being on any device is such novelty. And then all of a sudden, they get into those upper elementary grades, middle, high school, and that novelty is worn off. So how do we engage those older kids? How do we get them in and make this fun, and keep them interested in it? So I think that there's a few things, and I know, Dan, you've touched on a few of these already, but I'll just kind of go over what I think can help to increase that engagement. First is our adaptive learning. So all of our personalized practice, or formerly called problem keys, that focuses on those exact skills that kids need a little bit more practice with. It makes it feel like a really personalized experience for them. I also think student choice, huge motivator, definitely increases engagement. And as we know, increased engagement leads to increased achievement. So all of those lessons that Dan went over, including also our digital citizenship lessons, vocabulary lessons, giving kids the choice in which subject area they want to practice vocabulary in, really makes them feel like they have ownership over their own learning. And then finally, I would say another great way to increase that engagement is teaching them real life skills. I mean, how many teachers have heard their students say, when am I ever going to use this? Or how is this going to help me? And we've made sure to answer that by giving them lessons that highlight real life skills, like writing a resume, lessons on password privacy, media literacy. So I think that that's really important because kids are going to use those skills in the real world.
That's very true. And actually, just on that topic, I was going to ask you, but since you brought it up, what is your favorite of the new lessons that we brought in? We've spoken about making these things real world applicable. I know it's maybe like it's like choosing your favorite child, or which is the favorite of the new lessons that we've added in.
I know that's really hard. I feel like as I've worked on each of them, I say that each one is my favorite. I would say because I was a kindergarten teacher for so many years, the click and drag is exciting for me just because I know how many kids that's really going to help, that explicit practice in how to click and drag. And we give some great techniques on easy ways for them to click and drag. I know that kids struggle with that, holding down an index finger. There's some easier ways. So I'm excited about that. And then, of course, I love our email activity. I feel like that one's so fun. Kids feeling like they get to choose how to respond to historical figures is a really engaging activity. So I think that those older students are going to enjoy that one. Dan, what about you? What's your favorite?
Well, I was going to say, I mean, I really like the email activity. I love the resume builder because obviously, my dream of being a bacon tester is now rekindled because of it. But I would also say as well, like, don't sleep on the click and drag because, as you well know, I have learned a new technique because it turns out I've been doing it wrong all these years, and that is not simple patter. That is the honest truth. So, I'm already learning a lot from the new lessons. One of the other questions that we often get asked, Molly, is, and I think I kind of touched on it a little bit in the talk. Teachers often don't have formal training in teaching typing. It's a bit more of a niche subject, at least these days, than perhaps it used to be. But I've spoken about how important it is that students are getting that tuition. So, what advice would you give to teachers who maybe don't have that formal typing training and are maybe a bit anxious about starting their teaching journey with typing?
Yeah. I mean, teachers already have so much on their plates, and to think that they then need to learn how to become typing teachers is pretty daunting. So I think that this new grade-based curriculum is going to be very appealing to a lot of teachers, because if all you have the time for is to click on the grade you teach, typing.com is going to take over the rest. We've made sure that everything is age appropriate for the grade that you teach. But if you're somebody who wants to go in and create those custom lessons or remove lessons, and really monitor how your kids are progressing through the curriculum, you have those options. So I think it's going to make it much easier for teachers. I think it's going to save them a lot of time. And as a former teacher, I know time is at a premium.
It's very true. Time is at a premium for all of us, and we are on that point running out of time. So I do want to start drawing us to a close. But before we do that, let me just share one last quote with you all. And this is from the New York Times bestselling author Ellen Hopkins. And I think it really exemplifies what we've been talking about here today. Like so many parents, she saw her kids transition from remote learning and struggle to type their schoolwork. After just an hour's practice with typing.com, though, she'd already seen an amazing improvement. And this isn't just about us. This is about the impact that learning to type can have on all our students. And our message for them really should be: typing faster will change your life. And that is it from us. Thank you so much for being with us here today. I appreciate all the teachers who have joined the ISTE conference today, despite the fact that it's the end of the academic year. Thank you to everyone who has commented. We've had a few comments here. I've had an absolute blast. As a special thank you, in the next day or two, we will be sharing some special custom back-to-school lessons that we've developed especially for ISTE attendees, and we'll be adding that to the resources below. So be sure to check in on that, and you can add it to your virtual tote bags. You can also reach out to us using the details on the screen. Thank you again, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks, everyone.